People coming in. Well, good evening. If you're just joining us for this evening's masterclass, we'll just give it a couple more seconds for people to join us. I hope everybody's well. We're really privileged tonight to have Sandi, who's going to be speaking with us and sharing her experiences. Sandi's a former student of Ziggurat, so she can kind of relate to a lot of what you guys are going through and some of your journey. She's also an architect and also a BIM coordinator, worked for some very prestigious companies, I think it's fair to say, Sandi. So Zaha Hadid and at Wilkinson Air, and I'm sure we'll learn lots more about Sandi's journey today and a kind of career path. So what we're going to do is we're going to hand over to Sandi in a moment, and then I think we'll probably maybe have a few moments at the end, Sandi, maybe for questions, if anybody's got any questions or thought. So while Sandi's given her presentation, maybe if you kind of want to save your questions to the end, or please feel free to maybe put them in the chat in case you forget, and we can come to those at the end of the session. Okay. So Marianne, I think if that's okay, I think we'll probably hand over and go away.
Yes, perfect. So Sandi, if you want, I will move the slides.
Thanks, Sandi.
Yes. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Sandi, and as Stefan said, I'm currently working as a BIM coordinator. So nice to meet you all. Yeah, if you want to start, if you can switch to the next slide, yeah. So I just wanted to talk about my first BIM job after I graduated from Ziggurat with the master's. Actually, having the master's degree was one of the reasons I really got the job, because it's such a rare thing on the market at the moment, and it was highly desirable. So as my first job, I was working at Zaha Hadid Architects as a BIM architectural assistant, and I've been placed on a couple of projects. And I just included some screenshots from one of the ones that I've been on mainly. It was a residential and hotel project, and things that were under my responsibility was, you know, actually modeling the design options, doing the design coordination. But at the same time, I was model managing, like from the BIM standpoint of view, was model managing and the coordination between disciplines. So I would be handling the architectural model, and then I would be getting, since we was the lead appointed party, we would be getting the models from, you know, the structural engineers, MEP engineers, and I would be then coordinating them. That would be under my responsibility to coordinate, carry out any necessary clash detection, and you know, issue clash reports. So for the next DTMs, design team meetings, I would raise those questions so we could have you know, resolve those clashes. What was interesting about this, because this was a design build project, so it was as we was modeling and it was actually being built. So it was really crucial for us to be you know, careful with the clash detection, with the coordination. As soon as we got the structural model, as soon as we got information and drawings from the site team, we had to implement them quickly in our Revit models, and then, you know, carry out checks in Navisworks. Another thing that was part of this was content management. So content in the sense, because we was mainly working in Revit, I would be managing any family libraries and creating the family libraries that are relevant to the project, and that would be in line with the information requirements, the level of detail. And, you know, of course, handling the information exchange through BIM 360, making sure that everyone's communicating correctly as set out in the BEP, and you know, using the common data environment correctly. So yeah, that was my first BIM job. So these general skills and takeaways, like the ones I listed here in the slide, those skills came from the masters. So that was really useful for me in this first job. And these pretty much the responsibilities outlined was pretty much on all of the projects I was placed on. Just sometimes it was more people who was helping me. Sometimes it was just me handling it. If you can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. And recently, I've moved over to another company, Wilkinson Air, and I'm working as a BIM coordinator. So I have a bit more responsibility there because I'm not just on projects. I'm kind of, it's like more of a company-wide position. So I'm a BIM coordinator on multiple projects, and I'm not really involved in terms of design, like in the previous role as a BIM architectural assistant, where I was actually designing, offering design options, some design solutions, etc. Here, I'm strictly a BIM coordinator and information manager. And I'm, like I said, I have a couple of projects that I'm overlooking, and basically the role entails to be setting up the BIM projects. So whatever contractual BIM projects that we get, I would be setting them up in terms of, the 3D models, in terms of the CDE, in terms of the folder structure, etc. I would be supporting the project BIM leads, like the project architects and the BIM manager. So in supporting in a sense of the BIM strategy and the coordination. So sometimes we would be the ones issuing the information requirements. Sometimes we would be the ones getting the information requirements, and we would have to be then, providing a BEP, writing the BIM execution plan according to the requirements we receive from the client. But what I've learned is the majority of the time, the client is not aware of what requirements they need, what information requirements they're supposed to give, because they're not very BIM experienced. So you would have to be really aware of the standards of the ISO, and so you are able to kind of help the client navigate and set up a BEP yourself without their information requirements, and have that back and forth conversation with the client. So that's what I learned. Most of the time is like, in an ideal world, everybody's aware of BIM, everybody's aware of all the standards and how to set out their own information requirements, but that was not the case. So majority of the time you'd have to work with the client, and because they want a BIM project, or they're required, they have to produce a BIM project, but they're not aware of how to do it. So you would have to be the one to kind of have conversation with them to set up a BEP and issue an execution plan. So based off of their requirements or the standards within the company, you would have to come up with a BIM strategy and the coordination. So as a BIM coordinator, I would be there having conversations and being in meetings with BIM leads and BIM managers to set those out. And then once we set up a BEP, then we can, or once we get a BEP, depending, we would then, as BIM coordinators, ensure that the project follows that the team is aware what the BEP is, what the BIM execution plan is, that you have to be aware, like that some people just forget because of their mindset. So you have to remind them constantly, please refer to the BEP. If you want to set up with any process in the project, you have to always refer to the BEP and see if you're adhering to the standards, to the rules or not. And you have to keep reminding that to the team, and constantly check their, set up a person who is like a document checker or manager, who will ensure that all the documentation produced by the team is in accordance with the standards of the company and the standards of the BEP. So you would have to, as a BIM coordinator, be able to do that. And of course, a lot of my job actually requires to be providing technical support, because not a lot of companies, there are a lot of Revit users, right? But Revit is probably one of the main softwares at the moment being used for producing, BIM models, and not everyone in the company has that level of training or has any level of training in that software. And also, as a BIM coordinator, you have to ensure that everybody who is on the team is aware what softwares are being used and has the necessary skills. And if required, you have to train them. So I, as a BIM coordinator, at the beginning of the project or before the project starts, make sure that I carry out necessary training in person or use company resources. So if they have access to LinkedIn Learning or some other platform, I would make sure that the team takes those necessary online classes and then carry out workshops with them to answer any questions to make sure that they're all on the same level and know how to use the software. Yeah, so, and as now that you've set up the team, made sure they're all on a good skill level, now you've set up the BP, now you're making sure everybody is aware on the same page, then you would regularly catch up with the team and carry out model checks and delegate any model maintenance to the team. So because to some people that software might be new, they might not know the best practice ways to model in that software. So they might make mistakes or might create unnecessary geometry or might create unnecessary lines. And, you know, with, for example, software like Revit, everything is information. Nothing is dead. Every single line carries information. Every single, modeling element carries information. So some people are still not aware because they're new to the software. So you have to make sure that you constantly do model checks and see if, they've created too many model groups, or they've created too many line styles, or if they've created too many view templates. And if they've done that, the model can become really heavy. It will be really hard to exchange later on or hand over later on. And it will be just in general slowing down the whole process for the modeling. So you have to be able to, with whatever company resources, whatever the company offers, like whatever tools it does, it has to carry out those model checks. You have to be able to use them, carry them out, and delegate it to the team, whether if you know that they have a person who is able to do that, or you carry it out yourself. And so this is pretty much my role as BIM coordinator, and it happens across several projects. But apart from that, there is also a bigger BIM team project across the company, which is basically the ongoing development of the company's BIM infrastructure and its standards. So the company, the majority of the companies are realizing now the importance of BIM and how their company standards needs to adhere with like the industry standards now, and how they need to update their software, their hardware, the mindsets, the templates, etc., the processes, that they all write it out. So in cases like when your client comes to you and says, I don't have any information requirements, you can rely on your own company standards and produce information in line with your own requirements and standards. So as part of my job, I am assisting in improving the internal company's information management. So how do people exchange files within the company inside, not just like the consultants outside. They learn that before you can collaborate effectively with external teams outside the company, you have to make sure that the internal processes of the company are all coordinated and information management is on point and everybody knows the process and nobody is just sharing dead files through emails, making sure that people working on the same version of the file, making sure that there's a standard folder structure if there's an internal drive and network, making sure that there is a workflow that is set out in a document that everybody can refer to. So things like that. And so from the experience I learned from working here, it's not just about setting out BPs and working with external consultants and things like that. It's also about making sure the internally company is on the level that is able to deliver BIM projects. If you can put next slide, please. Yeah, and this is some of the three main points I found useful that I took away from the masters that I'm still using. Is, like I said, in both companies I worked in, BIM implementation was a big part. So the company-wide BIM implementation, the BIM standards that I just talked about. And in the masters you learn that it's such a long process because of the person factor, the human factor, because BIM comes with a mindset. So it's really hard to switch people over from that mindset. So you need to know ways of, it's more psychology here in that sense. So you have to approach that with that in mind, knowing that even though you might be so enthusiastic and want to change things in the company and improve everyone's workflow, it doesn't happen overnight, because people just don't switch. They are used to one thing, even if it's not efficient, even if it's not comfortable. They're used to that thing, and it takes a bit of time, and it takes a bit of wisdom from your part to implement it. In Scrum and construction, I found when I learned, when I was doing our final master thesis, the project for it, we was using Agile, we was using Scrum, was using Kanban, and those things really, like, they really amazed me, and I started using it in my own life. I started then implementing it at my workplace, because I started noticing how the regular project management, or sometimes there's no project management whatsoever, you would notice with architects, and there's no proper project management process set out. There's no, there's no task management or nothing like that. They just, do it. They just keep working for the deadlines, and there's a lot of miscommunication. There's no transparency. So these methodologies, when I started to introduce it to teams I was working with, we found that it improved the overall teamwork, because everybody's aware who's doing what, everybody's aware of everyone's workflow. There's less bottlenecks, there's less things that stop you. Everybody's aware, everybody can see, there's an overview, there's a roadmap, there's a plan. There's, you set up sprints, you set up the visual boards to help people see the amount of work that needs to be done, etc. So I found this this methodology that's usually used in software production is actually quite useful for architects and construction industry. And in general, the fact that the master's was carried out in a way that you have a simulation project, and you can see what an ideally what it would be, what an ideal BIM project would look like. Then you have a kind of a good picture of what it's supposed to be. So when you get to real world and you see how far from the ideal it is, but it helps you to, know what things to focus on, where to start from, what things need to change, what needs to be implemented, whether maybe it's an internal problem, like, the company's standards are lacking or need to be improved, or whether it's external, the external communication is not really set out properly, the processes are not set out. So the fact that you have this opportunity to kind of overview a project as a whole, or what a BIM project is supposed to look like, helps you then in real life and real work to understand where to start, what to improve, what needs to be done on each project. And that'll be it from me. If you have any questions, or if Stefan wants to.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you. That was really insightful. And I think it's nice for me to see that you've taken kind of elements from the course, particularly around the Agile and Scrum, because that's quite interesting, because obviously it's not as well known within construction. It's obviously come from manufacturing and things like that. So it's good to see you starting to use that. So we have got a couple of questions that have come through. So I'll take them through in the order that we're starting to get them from. So what's the best way to organize the common data environment, do you think? But more importantly, to make sure that everybody on the project's going to really use it. And I really like the fact that you kind of pick up a lot on mindset as well. So I guess that kind of cultural change is really important. But yeah, what key elements do you think we could all take away from your experience to date?
Well, actually, a project that I'm just currently started. So I had a whole big headache today because it's a proper BIM project. We have a BEP in place, everything is set out. We had a BIM brief meeting where the whole team had a big meeting, and the BIM manager was going through what the processes are, how we're supposed to be exchanging files, etc. I guess because it was quite long, people might have zoned out and missed some things. But today there was a problem because a number of external consultants were seeing emails, and they're just sharing files through email, attaching them to the email, and nothing is uploaded to the CDE. And I think that's just comes down to, CDE can be really organized. You can have for example, let's say BIM 360, the Autodesk is going to be the platform. So it can be really organized, it can be set up, everyone has licenses, everyone has access, but it's really up the responsibility of each company that is part of this project to make sure that every single team member that is part of this project is aware of the platform and knows how to use it. Like, that's their responsibility. So if you, as for example, the lead appointed party, the architects, if you don't use the CD and you don't upload it, that's your fault, basically. You have to make sure that the team members are aware and receive the necessary training. So I would say that the organizing CDE part is the least problematic part. It's making sure that you're having regular meetings with the team and making sure that they are aware and what is the process of things, and having things in their face. So at the moment, what is happening in the company in terms of improving the infrastructure, we're really trying to utilize the Microsoft 360 all of the apps. So on Teams, you can set up teams, you can structure that each team has its tabs, you can link tabs, you can have SharePoint sites. So because Microsoft is being used by everyone, we're trying to utilize that. So when they open their team, there is a tab straight away for their team files, so they all can see and access everything, like the BP, the requirements, so they can, there's no like, oh, I don't know where it is. It's right in their face because Teams is open 24/7. So you need to make sure that you accommodate, the team itself, making sure that things are available and it's in their face. So it's really hard to avoid, and having, reminders to them. This is how you use the CDE. This is how you upload it, making sure. And then eventually the team will pick it up because it's part of the weekly process. And the more things you can automate, the better.
Yeah. So this probably comes on quite nicely to our next question then. So I think what you're saying is it's about there's an element of organization, it's about meeting regularly, about using a suite of tools that people are already familiar with. So I guess there's lots of tools that we can already use within our organizations. So how would you make sure that all the participants are kind of carrying out their tasks? Obviously, I guess you're meeting regularly. Is it through timesheets? Are you having kind of scrum meetings? Maybe you could talk us through that sort of element.
Well, in the current position as a BIM coordinator, I'm not carrying, so that's more like the project lead architect's role. He's more of a project management, so they would carry out the task, the assigning the tasks, making sure that deliverables are being delivered by the deadline specified, etc. But it's not, I don't really regulate it on a day-to-day basis, but I'm trying to introduce the methodologies of Agile and Scrum to them, so they actually have a structured way of managing their projects and tasks, coordinating the tasks within teams. Because even though I'm not part of the design process, I'm not part of the design team's daily tasks, they can whenever they come to me for software support, etc., I can just overhear the complaints, like, oh, I'm being overloaded with tasks. It's like my manager doesn't see how many tasks I have, and the other person has like one or two when I'm overloaded, etc. It comes from lack of transparency. So it's important that whoever the project manager is on the project is aware how to manage tasks and how to coordinate them, making sure everything is transparent and the load is distributed equally and accordingly. So to make sure that they're carrying their tasks is really just coordinating them in an organized fashion, having an actual process in place, not just randomly saying, oh, actually you do this and you do that. Actually have a clear team structure and everybody knows what their responsibility and role is.
So Edney is asking a similar question around kind of the tasks and the planning, but I guess it's about, like you say, that transparency is really important. I just wanted to ask you then, in terms of your project teams, so it sounds like you're working on some absolutely amazing projects, not just here in the UK, but obviously worldwide. So the organizations that you worked for or are working for now are obviously global organizations. The team that you're working in, are you all based in the UK, or is it a dispersed team? How are you finding that? Have you got teams deployed in different countries?
Yeah, so there's two projects that right now I'm overlooking that are in another country. So our team in Wilkinson, they are all in UK, but because we're working, with with a client, so they are either in one of the projects is in the Middle East, the other project is in Australia. So when the Middle East project is quite well organized because it's a very BIM project. There's all these processes set out, etc. But the Australian one is harder. Well, first of all, because of that major time difference,
Yeah, of
and
course,
because
it's big time difference, isn't it?
yeah, so like by the time they get out of work, we start work. So sometimes you have to get up for 6 a.m. meetings, etc., because they are just finishing work at 6 p.m. over there. So that's quite difficult, and that's where it's crucial, especially when you have such big time differences, so you can barely actually catch each other. That's where you actually have to set out those processes and set out the communication channels, so everything is organized and in line. So there's no, confusion going on in terms of who does what. And interestingly enough, because I joined the project as it's already it's going to be finished soon, but so it was set up way before me. But the way the company set it up, not the company in Australia, they wanted us to share a model with them, and that makes it really hard because they're, first of all, they're from a different company, second of all, from a very different time, from a different like what do you call it, time zone. So whatever you model the next day, or you model something and then you save it the next day, you come back and it might be gone because somebody there might have removed it, etc. So it's so important for to think through the details in terms of the models if you're doing that. But I would not recommend to set it up like that in the first place. You shouldn't be sharing models across countries.
I think if you can, some of the organizations that I've worked for, something like ACOM and big multinationals, if you set it up right, you can work it to your advantage. So we call it following the sun. So, I would often work on a project, and then at my end of the day, hand it over and someone else is working on it. So effectively, somebody is working on that project 24 hours a day. So I think if you can get it right, it can work. But like you say, I think it's quite interesting, isn't it? When you, not only you dealing with different time zones, but you're probably talking about different cultural backgrounds. BIM, as we know, BIM means different things to different people. We're obviously quite entrenched in a lot what's come from the UK, but also the ISOs. But not everybody uses the ISOs. So some countries have their own kind of local standards. So I guess that's probably quite an interesting factor, isn't it? That you've got competing regulations, different standards, different meanings of what BIM is to everybody.
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic.
And then, but you just follow with whatever contract says, really. That's what you just end up with. One thing, what you mentioned, BIM means different things to different people, is that a lot of people, even though they know something about BIM, they just think BIM is just Revit, or BIM is just whatever software they're in, and they're just stuck there. So what we're trying to do now is kind of get rid of the BIM, I don't know, to referring to things as BIM, because they're like, oh, but the project is not BIM. But you're like, it's a company standard now. Every project is BIM, kind of. So we're trying to refer to as information management, because what happens is now project architects only get to us when they're about to set up their Revit model, and we miss all those stages of them talking to the client and getting the information requirements, and they only get to us when they want the Revit model. And when they get to us, we're like, okay, you want a Revit model, but did we agree on shared coordinate system? What about the surveyor? What about the structural engineer? What are they? Did we agree? Like, oh yeah, they already have a Revit model, but they send it to us and it's not in the right location, or it's not at the same survey point like it's supposed to be. And this is where the problem arises, because they think BIM is only starts with Revit. They forget that it involves a lot of information management and information exchange before things move over to modeling.
Sure.
Now we're trying to make sure everybody's aware that, you know, the BIM team and the company needs to get involved way before you start moving to Revit or other modeling softwares.
Brilliant. We've been asked if you could, it might be quite hard to say what your biggest struggle is, but if you had to kind of name one or a couple, what's been your biggest struggle if you've had one to date, would you say?
With just working in BIM?
Yeah, I'll ask the person who's asked the question. I think it might, I guess she's probably just saying in general during your career, you know, has it been around kind of processes? Has it been cultural barriers? Is it, you know,
just mindset, people's mindset.
Sure.
People just being really hard, you know, to change. They just don't want to, or, you know, they keep trying to find ways of avoiding it, or, you know, changing it or accepting it. So it really slows down the whole process when people really don't want to change the way they think or see some things.
Sure.
A lot of people still think in 2D, and it's been really hard to work with people to just, like, you have to really become as like a psychologist and, you know, find ways to approach them so it looks like their idea, so they accept it, because otherwise they don't, and it just, you know, staggers the whole process.
So what's next for Sandi in terms of your learning journey, if you like? Obviously you did your masters. Did you continue? Have you got aspirations to further? You mentioned the LinkedIn learning, or is it about learning on the job and really kind of crafting your skills and you gathering experience? What lies ahead for you, would you say?
Well, I got quite interested in the project management aspect of it and the information management aspect of it. So my next step, I was going to get more in depth, because I want to bring over Agile and Scrum more into construction, introduce it, and, you know, so I want to get certified as Scrum and Agile, and I want to, you know, get an ISO if possible, if I have time to get an ISO certification, so I'm more familiar with this international standards in project management and information management. So I'm moving over towards the information management route, because I realize that's where the cause of everything is, where the starting point. So I feel like it's like, if that's really set out in the company, within internally, it really helps with the modeling, the projects, etc. So,
and I like to think that the course probably gives our students a good kind of all-roundedness. You know, there's a bit of modeling in there, there's a bit of management, a bit of processes. So when you do accelerate with your career, I guess there's so many paths that you can take, isn't there? Some people kind of go down the modeling route. Even just my own journey, you know, I don't model anything. I'm kind of more about standards and processes. So I guess there's so many different avenues that people can take, which is really exciting.
Yes,
Somebody
absolutely.
says it's continual learning, isn't it?
Yeah, and BIM is, like, you know, it's so fresh, so new, and it's still being evolved. It's still evolving. It's still developing. It's still improving. So it is continuous. Well, it never stops learning.
Sure.
And I think it's important to keep up up to date with, you know, the current standards and trends in the industry in BIM.
Yeah, and I think it's probably fair to say, you know, we will be talking about lots of different things in 5 years' time. You know, hopefully a lot of what we're talking about today would become business as usual, hopefully. So we wouldn't even talk about BIM because it'll be hopefully part of our day jobs and our processes, and it's that kind of business as usual. Now, I guess that's really what we're all striving for, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, that's the reason the company at the moment trying to do the improve its BIM infrastructure and change, just make it as a company standard. So every single project, BIM or not, contractually, it will be with those standards. It will be carried out. And as to be honest, because I started as a Revit trainer, and then I got into BIM. So I carry out trainings in person sometimes, and I just like showcase on a modeling level how efficient it can be. And people are like, oh my God, I had to do that in CAD or MicroStation for 3 weeks, and this can be done in Revit in an hour. And it's like, yeah. So, people are seeing even on the modeling level how efficient it can be. So once they move past the fact that BIM is not just modeling, it's more than that, they will, I guess, move over. But in terms of the career paths, it's like you said, the master's shows you a lot of ways that you can progress, and you don't have to become an information manager or a BIM coordinator. You can become a project BIM lead, because those are now becoming really popular. Like if you're into modeling and into architecture and design and stuff, a lot of companies are looking for people who know BIM, who know the softwares, and they are architects, so they can model, so they can be actually part of the project and model in the project, and then be able to overlook those processes on the team level in terms of modeling and production.
Fantastic. So if there's anybody, just in the last minute or so, if anybody from...
Yes, I just want to ask you, Sandi, if you can just share with us if it was difficult to get these jobs, because of course some of the students are finishing the master now, they can think, wow, where can I start and how it could happen, and you can share with us how it was to find these jobs.
Yeah, I mean, the first job, it was actually easy, because I wasn't looking for one, because I still had another month to finish off the lectures and submit all the deadlines. And because I kept in good contact with my my university lecturers, and you have contacts, people come looking for someone who's trained in BIM and who knows softwares, etc. People just immediately recommend you. So it's really important to keep in contact with your I don't know, even the past university lecturers or whatever. So some people can just reach out and look for someone like that. And also it's important to have a good BIM portfolio, I think, and CV, because architects, especially if you want to work in an architectural company, I would say have a good visual portfolio where you can where you list out all the key skills that you have. And I had an extensive 3 pages in my portfolio on masters on this masters, and how it gave me the understanding of BIM. And I think that was the pages when I was in an interview talking about my experience and how I would be suitable for this job. That would be the landing the job part, because they would understand that I actually have an in-depth understanding, because I've done, even if I didn't have BIM coordination experience before, I was on the simulation projects throughout the masters, and I could explain every single step, and the documentation, things like that, the process, the standards, and they would understand that I actually have an understanding. Not a lot of masters do that. They don't actually give you this overview of the whole process of on an example of a project. So
do you think, having just thinking about the BIM portfolio, then did you include parts from your WYSIG building, from your final master's thesis, because you mentioned about a visual portfolio? Did that help including aspects, and kind of what aspects did you include?
Well, I've included things that I was interested in, or that were really important to me, that I really was passionate about when I was working on the project or the final master's thesis. So I would include screenshots of the diagrams that we've made for our final master's thesis presentation. So I would include those screenshots, so it's easier to explain, and some screenshots from the report, some screenshots of the building, some screenshots of Solibri, and the softwares we use to coordinate and do the clash detections and the classification. So all those screenshots, they really help, and just also listing out the key key skills that you get from the masters really helped. And in general, I think there's a big market gap right now. Everybody needs a BIM person, a BIM coordinator, and even with this current job, they were struggling to find the right person because not everyone has a relevant master's, not everyone has the relevant experience, you know, not everyone is able to showcase. And my current manager said, "Oh, as soon as you told me about your master's, that's it. I understood. You know what BIM's about. You know the process. You understand." So I think it's really important that you kind of showcase all of those points that you covered in the masters to show you have the experience to move over into BIM in your career.
Perfect. Thank you, Sandi. So Stefan, I think no, nobody had another question.
Yeah. So I think it's probably a good moment to close tonight's session. I think it's been fantastic, Sandi, hearing your journey. And it is a journey because, you know, we can see you're going places, and I think your passion and enthusiasm for BIM and, you know, everything you're doing comes across really loud and clear. So just on behalf of myself and Zugarat and everybody on the call, you know, thank you very much for sharing your experiences, and you know, for those little tips that you've given us as well, and for our students, because they are, you know, following in that footstep as well, and try and get into the marketplace and, you know, work on some fantastic projects like you are as well. So on behalf of myself and Mariana, thank you very much for taking the time, and we hope to see everybody shortly.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you,
everybody.
everybody.
Very much, Sandi.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.